This is Brother Naba'a Muhammad. I'm the host of StraightWords with Naba'a Richard Muhammad, DJ Murphy, and James G. Muhammad. Our live broadcast airs Tuesdays, 9 p.m. to midnight Central Time on WVON AM 1690 Black Talk Radio Chicago. And we're live streamed on the iHeartRadio app and WVON.com. I wanted to share a little perspective and commentary with you. So here we go. You're wrong, Mr. President. With anti-Gaza genocide protests still roiling and in some cases spreading across America and college campuses, the president strode into the political and social storm. The real core and point of his message, delivered on May 2nd, was an approval of crackdowns on students, which he wrapped in a thin layer of support for dissent. But President Biden wants convenient dissent. He wants submissive dissent. He wants a kind of obedient dissent that doesn't break rules or violate the sensibilities or the plans of the Israeli government, Jewish groups, or Zionists who are determined to stop U.S. citizens from expressing to colleges, universities, and their government disgust over the slaughter of Palestinians by Israel's bloody-handed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his war cabinet, and their military. This slaughter is Biden-backed. His administration has given billions to Israel for weapons, opposed international efforts to charge Mr. Netanyahu with human rights violations, ignored misuse of U.S. arms by the Israeli Defense Force, and blocked United Nations efforts to somehow broker a ceasefire. These are all the actions and activity of President Biden and his administration, who also said May 2nd that the on-campus protests would not change his stance or his administration's policy. So speaking from the Roosevelt Room in the White House, Mr. Biden told the country dissent was an American right and tradition, but it must stay within the law and remain peaceful. Quote, he said, destroying property is not peaceful protest. He continued, quote, it is against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations, none of this is peaceful protest. So despite National Guardsmen, state troopers, police officers invading campuses in different parts of the country, Mr. Biden also said, quote, the American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how people respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a society, a civil society rather, and law and order must prevail. The president added, quote, there should be no place on campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. And he said, quote, no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. Bravo on those 2 points. Still, Mr. President, you could have called for greater tolerance among Americans with these very strong passions and views. Mr. President, you could have spoken of the strength found in restraint, and dialogue that's aimed at reaching the truth. Mr. President, you could have called on police and protesters to exercise discipline and control as each performed their respective roles. Instead, Mr. President, your law and order message missed some things. One, the students are the victims of police violence and pro-Israeli attackers, like students who were assaulted at UCLA in a protest encampment. These UCLA students, who are standing on the right side of history, said police were on campus but did nothing. So, Mr. President, how about you call on law enforcement to treat dissent on campus as political speech that doesn't require beating, tasing, pepper spraying, and slamming people to the ground? Two, the essence of free speech and social and political protests in this country is grounded in lawbreaking. One of America's most renowned and celebrated acts of political activity was the Boston Tea Party, December 16, 1773 in Massachusetts. Dressed as Native Americans, the Sons of Liberty boarded ships and destroyed property, British tea, to express displeasure with injustice colonists believed were being poured out against them, including unfair taxation and the lack of representation before the British Crown. Three, political protest and dissent by its nature almost always breaks the law, because we have the aggrieved exercising the highest form of political speech by physically taking to the street. That act says the wrong perpetrated is so outrageous that letters, phone calls, media appearances, and polite behavior isn't enough. Inevitably, the established powers declare the dissatisfied are acting illegally, must stop or be punished. The protesters refuse because they are standing on a higher law based on what is right. That stand has expanded rights for Americans, which are actually under attack right now, and led to changes in laws that expanded American democracy. But the abuse of students and kowtowing to Jewish power by bringing in heavy-handed law enforcement escalated things. It wasn't the actions of young people. Mainstream and corporate media across the political perspective, across the political spectrum, repeat Zionist lies and lines and give little airtime to pro-Palestinian voices, while journalists justify shutting Americans up. Where are the defenders of free speech? Whether protests have been against unbridled capitalism or for expanded labor rights, appeals for more women's rights, expanded rights for the disabled, greater civil rights, fighting inequality, and embracing greater equality. Whether protests have been about ending police brutality or war, or ending anti-blackness, those who stood up were labeled criminals and troublemakers. But the trouble they made pushed America closer to making good on her promises. Now we have black civil rights leader Al Sharpton, who built his career on protests, who was accused of being an instigator, who was accused of violence, and former black police chief Charles Ramsey who are actually likening and equating the student protests to the pre-planned Trump-led insurrection of January 2nd, 2020. Actions aimed at overthrowing an election. Actions that included assaults on law enforcement by Trumpsters who built gallows, called for the hanging of then President Mike Pence and the murder of U.S. congressmen. They also used weapons as they took over the U.S. Capitol. That wasn't a protest. That was the unraveling of a great nation and sedition, an attempt to violently overthrow the U.S. government. Such talk is dangerous, and these comparisons are flat-out lies. It's all pushed by Jewish groups to kill criticism of Israel and scare up support for Joe Biden. But there's a better way, Mr. President. Listen to your citizens. Don't be led by Jewish forces who have their own agenda, which may not be the best agenda for America. Can't you hear the millions, including many who put you in office, saying, "Stop the slaughter"? Don't you see the world saying to Israel, "Stop the killing"? Have you considered Scripture, which warns those who live by the sword shall die by the sword, because God himself will judge and destroy them? As Press TV and an Iranian news service noted, Israel, which currently faces genocidal crimes at the International Court of Justice, has killed 34,488 Palestinians since last October, when it waged a bloody war on the Gaza Strip. Over 77,643 other Palestinians have also been injured, and around 8,400 may be trapped under the rubble. And we know that probably 1 million people or more are facing or beginning to endure starvation right now. Mr. President, may we remind you of history that you and others are ignoring, hiding, and distorting. Listen to these words from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. He says, quote, "Since 1967, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children, or fully 1/5 of the population of the West Bank and Gaza, have been incarcerated in Israeli jails. Organizations such as Amnesty International, the Red Cross, and several other groups say that Israel has routinely used physical and psychological torture against Arabs and Palestinians, including the use of prolonged beatings, electric shocks, hanging by the wrists, and sexual assaults. In short, everything America has been doing in Iraq." The minister continues, "At this time, there are nearly 5 million Palestinians living in a desperate state of oppression under Israeli rule." He was speaking in 2007. How much more, Mr. President, have Palestinians suffered in the last 17 years? Not to mention their suffering from the time that Israel was stolen from them. How much more, Mr. President, do you expect they will suffer? And, Mr. Biden, how much more will the American people suffer? How much division must they endure for the sake of Israel, lying, murder, and injustice? This is Brother Naba'a Muhammad and you've been listening to Straight Words. You can get more if you go and find us, Straight Words Media, on Spotify and YouTube, and you can subscribe. You can also get more content at straightwords.com. Assalamu alaikum. We hope you'll keep coming back for more.